Caring for someone with dementia requires immense strength and love. But what happens when you need support navigating complex financial and personal decisions? And how can you ensure your love extends beyond caregiving, shaping a meaningful legacy? Tune in as we explore the role of a professional fiduciary and how to plan a legacy of love for your family. Welcome to Fading Memories, your source for all things dementia caregiving. I'm your host, Jen Fink, and I have had 3 generations of loved ones with dementia, and I'm here to share the knowledge I've gained with you. Welcome back, Fading Memories listeners. This is Jen Fink, your host and caregiver best friend. I always appreciate that you tune in every week to hear my guest. And this week, my guest is Sarah Eckline, a California licensed professional fiduciary, and she's also the founder of Trust and Honor. Her journey into fiduciary work was inspired by personal experiences with loss and end of life care, leading her to support individuals and families during life's most vulnerable transitions. With over a decade of experience in the private fiduciary profession, Sarah specializes in trust administration and special needs trusts, and regularly works with clients in the planning phase. She also hosts the Legacy of Love podcast, so yay, another podcaster, where she often offers a more holistic perspective on redefining the meaning of legacy. She lives in the San Francisco Bay Area with her husband and young daughter. So thank you for joining me, Sarah.
Oh, Jen, thanks so much. It's great to be here. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Me too, because I learned all about what beneficiaries and what were we? I wasn't a beneficiary, I was like the person in charge of the trust.
The trustee?
Yeah, that's the word. Must be Monday. I learned all about what I should have done after my mom died and after I did all that stuff. So fortunately didn't have any issues, but you know, that's
Well, Jen, I think I find that's most people's stories. They find out kind of after the fact, and probably it was, I'm assuming, a difficult journey. I can't imagine most people wearing the hat of a trustee, that it's easy, especially when it's your parents, because you're going through loss and grief on top of needing to cancel Comcast. And, that alone, you can just pull your hair out.
my
Yeah.
biggest challenge was canceling my dad's cell phone.
Uh,
My dad was with AT&T. He was a retiree from AT&T. I got all the documentation together, made the phone call. The gal's like, "Oh, I'm so sorry to hear he's passed. Let me see what I can do to help you." Tappity tappity tap. Do you happen to have his PIN? No, unfortunately, I don't. Do you think you could ask him? At which point, I so seriously wanted to ask her, "Are you suggesting I get a Ouija board or what?" I had to tell her 5 times my dad was dead. Then we had to go into the store and handle it. It was like, it's a good thing that I'm emotionally strong because you're seriously testing me.
yeah, no, I know that story well, and they're reading that script and not really using much brain power.
They're not allowed to use brains, which is really stupid. But yeah, it was just, I can just imagine had it been somebody else, what that would have been like. But yeah, it's one of the reasons that I like conversations like this, but it's the other reason that I have a very large soapbox about we need to talk about what we want to do with the last decade and a half of our life, which isn't always the most joyous conversation, but once you get through some of it, the rest of it's not that big a deal. You're like, Eh, I was stressing about too many things that aren't really going to happen. So, how does that apply to trusts and all the financial stuff that can be a real challenge because, death brings out the greed in a lot of family members.
Oh, yeah, I know. I can. I mean, I say that the estate plan, this whole area, it's like the perfect storm where you're dealing with, right, loss and grief, whether someone's just passed or you're supporting someone through incapacity. Right, regardless, there's some grief and loss. You're somewhere in that journey. And then also money and finances. And then it touches upon our relationships. And most families are dysfunctional. It's just a matter of to what degree. So that's where it really can be a perfect storm. Of course, I'm going to be a bit biased where I think partnering with a professional can really bring so much peace of mind to families. I think most families, whether it's their, you know, between the means and then maybe they have their own family support or extended family where that feels like a better fit. But I think that there's a lot of wisdom that professional fiduciaries can bring to everyone's life. So that's why I love coming on podcasts like yours and reaching a larger audience because, I've administered at this point hundreds of trusts and estates over the course of my career. I've been doing this work for over a decade. And I've seen what's worked really well, and I've also seen what hasn't. And so that's where, if we plan proactively, I think that that's really where to begin. So in the United States, only 1 in 3 people actually have an estate plan in place. So yeah, it's a really unfortunate statistic, though I'm not surprised, right? That I know the numbers are so high, just even with families that, have $1,000 or $2,000 in savings. I mean, the numbers are just really grim. So it makes sense that people aren't planning. And in addition to also that perfect storm I talked about, right? We have to be willing to face our own mortality, face our relationship with money, our assets, maybe feeling like a lack of assets, and then also our relationship. So it's a lot of discomfort going through the journey. But what I find with the successful families, they really lean into those hard realities and they don't wait for a crisis to occur.
It's always fun to make decisions when you're stressed out in a crisis.
Yeah.
We generally make really great decisions when we're stressed out and you're like, holy crap, what the hell happened to my life? Yeah, it's a real good time to be doing those choices. And having gone through that with my dad, there was no way in hell I was doing that with my mom. Now, 99% of, they had an estate trust. Um, like you said, dysfunctional families. My dad made me the healthcare POA, the power of attorney.
Hmm.
But in an effort to get my sister and I to agree on things and to have a relationship, he made us both in charge of money. Now, just a little background. I am frugal to a fault. I love it. I love seeing how much money I can save and how much little I can spend for how much I can get. It's like a game. That's just me. My sister, when we were kids, used to spend her $1. We'd get $1 allowance. She'd spend $1.10, harassed me for extra. And I would always save at least half of mine. So that has not changed in 50 some odd years. And so it was like, are you trying to like just make this so much harder? We did agree for a while, and there was some things that I kind of turned a little blind eye to because fighting with her was more stressful than just kind of not paying attention to a few of the little minor things she was doing. But dear God, like that was the dumbest decision he could have made. He should have made her the healthcare power of attorney and left the money to me. That would have been a better division of responsibilities. But I'm sure you've heard more stories that are worse.
Yeah, well, and I have also seen that example a lot when they're like, "Oh, great, we'll either force this relationship or on paper it makes sense. Like, oh, our kids have always gotten along. Let's just both put them as co-trustee." And it can be really hard, especially again, going back to like a crisis, deciding on where mom and dad are going to live as they age and decline. And when resources are being quickly drained. I mean, I had one client where her cost of care was seven figures the last year of her life. So making those decisions of what's best, people are going to most likely have different opinions. So, yeah, more cooks in the kitchen, you'd expect conflict. And then with the family dynamics and relationships, that's so often where things can just really blow up. And I find downstream, that's where, I think the saddest piece is where families are torn apart and there's estrangement and that relationship's lost. So that's again where I think if we're proactive and really thinking things through, and also willing to have the difficult conversations with our loved one, it can be really, a night and day difference. And I believe ultimately not only changing our life, but having that ripple effect for the whole future generations in that family line. I mean, most of us, like you shared in your personal journey, and I think most of us know kind of worse, those worse stories where families are battling out in court or, money's been stolen, and it's really heartbreaking. So yeah, that's where again, planning. I'm kind of always beating that drum of planning. And what comes with that, I think, too, is really just the acknowledgement that these are living documents. So approaching this, approaching planning more with this openness and willingness to lean into the discomfort, we're not going to, what I see most of the time, and these are the families that are, the one third ahead of most. They're checking it off the box of things to do because they know they need it. They're approaching this as, just from a place of maybe like worry, anxiety, just knowing they need to get it done. But it's not this ongoing cultivating and reflecting on what are my values, what are my wishes, what is it that I want to leave behind. Um, and so often people are meeting with their attorney behind closed doors and not really communicating, with the key players of their estate plan. And that's obviously going to look different for each family. Sometimes it's working with, with their children, their adult children, an extended family, and sometimes it is a team of professionals. A lot of times it's a kind of a hybrid of that. So including and letting people know that that are those what I call proxies. So we can kind of get into defining kind of more of the work that I do and what I describe fiduciary work is more of an umbrella term. So I can wear many different hats, but proxies, whether you're wearing the hat of a healthcare decision maker or you're a power of attorney for finance or you're a trustee, all of these different hats, you should be meeting and sitting with your proxies and making sure not only are they willing to act, but are they really capable and able to? Are they the best person to do the job? And then, and then also getting your own affairs like in order. So that's, things are going to look very different if, you're very disorganized, some things are online, some things are on paper, scattered throughout the house. I mean, that's going to take a long time for someone to kind of come in and assess what needs to be done in the event of your incapacity or death. So that's where kind of more of this holistic planning, you know, and I hate to say, I hate to be so grim, but the estate plan is really kind of the starting place. But from there, it kind of can expand out just being so much more. So I know I said a lot, Jennifer, so I'll let you respond.
Well, I've talked about we did our estate plan during the pandemic, and I thought we were really behind because we were in our early to mid 50s. And our attorney's like, oh, no, no. And he kind of reiterated what you said about the statistics.
Yeah.
But the relief you feel when it's like you've answered all the tough questions. So we have one daughter and a stepson. Duh. Son-in-law. There we go. It's a Monday. And one of the questions that the attorney asked me was, well, what do you want to do with your estate? What little there is of it. if your daughter dies first. Now, my daughter has an autoimmune disease. I don't suspect that she'll die before me, but life is uncertain. And I looked at him and I'm like, well, that's just a really rude question. It was joking, but still like, that was not something I was expecting to hear. And he's like, I know, but I have to ask. And I'm like, I'm going to have to get back to you on that one. And people who have listened to this podcast religiously have heard this story. My son-in-law comes from a family that it does not have good physical health.
Mm.
Is worse with money than my sister.
Mm.
So my little, pea brain goes, well, if we die and he gets all our money, like again, what there is of it, and the house and blah 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 blah, and his siblings try to get, and I'm like, finally one day I was like coming out of my office and I was like, it won't matter, I'll be dead. And so I just looked at him and I said, don't do anything stupid. It's going to require me to come home and haunt you or come back and haunt you. End of stressing about that question. It was like, duh, like seriously, not my responsibility if he allows his siblings, because he's the youngest of 5, to manipulate him into doing stupid stuff. That's not my responsibility, especially if I'm dead.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm pretty practical, and we do have a little bit of a morbid sense of humor in my family. You might have noticed already. And then it's like, now we just joke about it because the biggest not conversations so much, but sometimes it'll come up with burials. Like my husband wants to be shot in space. I have kind of a against that because I think there's enough garbage up there, but hey, we'll respect his wishes. Not entirely certain what my son-in-law wants. Not sure he's decided. My daughter and I originally wanted to be like turned into trees, but I don't know if it's 26 or 27. I know long before either of us will be gone, there's the green burial, also known as human composting, which is a horrible term. Definitely not the one to use in the marketing materials. I'm like, I like that. And I actually have listened to a podcast that talked about it, and surprisingly, you get a lot of nice compost. I'm only 5'2". How much compost can you get from me? But apparently it's a lot more than you'd expect. I'm like,
It's a lot. Yeah.
oh, I was like shocked. So I'm like, okay, well, I like that idea too. So now my daughter and I kind of debate. Well, I'll be the compost, you'll be the tree, and it's like I said, morbid sense of humor, but there's no stress involved, and it's not like, oh, I don't want to talk about that. That's depressing. Yeah, whatever. That's how we roll. So how do you get people from the, oh my gosh, it's private, I've got it all handled, or my paternal grandmother didn't want to discuss end of life with my grandfather. I don't know how that worked. He passed away right before Christmas in 97. She passed away in April of 21. So I think my uncles ended up dealing with a lot of the end of life stuff with her because she just didn't want to talk about it. Which, considering she lived to 103, was she should have talked about it.
I know, isn't that amazing? Yeah, well, and I think that's such a big piece. I mean, the more that I do this work and also have conversations, like these and on my podcast, the more that I'm really kind of coming down to why is it that we don't want to talk and plan about, our end of life and after our death. And I think really the foundational piece is um, is really we don't want to face our own mortality and this denial of death, right? Our whole culture is, just promoting this, right? We like the fast, the new, the innovation, the young and the sexy, and you know, olding, death, and age. I mean, you even see that collectively where we really push our elders to the side. I hope baby boomers are going to change that, right? I feel like we're gonna have to, redo how aging has been up to now because there's just that demand. But
I
kind
think
of
it
going
is.
back to your sorry.
Oh, I think it is changing because, we talk about menopause more, which considering was hardly ever discussed at all, is still not enough, but it's shifting. It needs to shift a lot faster. But, we've got actresses that are, just beautiful in their 80s. And so there's a like a renaissance with aging. It doesn't always look like death and decline and disease, not in that order, but you know what I'm saying. So how do you get your clients over that hurdle? Because it's definitely cultural, and so that makes it definitely harder.
Yeah, I mean, and that's so much of it. I mean, to be honest, in some ways, I feel like I'm the least qualified person to answer this question because, you know, for the clients that I work with, again, in the planning phase, are really those the one third, ahead of most, where these are families that are planning, um, and again, most aren't. I have worked with and served, so that's kind of what's interesting about my work is that I find that people end up working with a professional fiduciary through like two different doors. One's what we've really talked about a lot, again, working proactively, deciding to work with a professional fiduciary. I would be named in estate planning documents. Typically, the estate planning attorney is making the referral and connecting their clients with me. But the other door of how I begin working with clients is the clients that either failed to plan or the plan wasn't really well thought out. So what that looks like, I mean, that's going to be probate. So, estates going through courts, that at least in California, that's what so much we want to avoid because I can definitely attest probate court is very slow, very inefficient. There's a lack of privacy,
Mm.
where with trust administration, for the most part, is pretty much more, efficient. And of course, there's typically that privacy piece, assuming everything stays out of court, which there never is a guarantee. But
We stayed out of ours was really easy. I almost hate to wonder what it is I didn't do. And over 5 years, it's too late. I think the statute of limitations is fast.
no, that's good. I mean, it should be. I mean, with a lot of families, where it is simple and they've set up a trust, especially where, you're the daughter, you've been onboarded, you know what their wishes are. Um, if they have kind of if all the accounts are titled correctly and, the house is already titled in the trust, I mean, you you wrap everything up. You pay all the debts, you file the tax returns. I'm assuming you probably worked with an attorney at some point to also guide you through kind of all the pieces to just make sure everything was done. But yeah, so that's anyways, sorry, going back to the example of the second door, with probate, conservatorships is another piece. I don't specialize in that, but that's always going to be court supervised. It doesn't always mean that the client didn't poorly plan. Sometimes a conservatorship's needed, even if you had a state plan in place for reasons I don't need to go down because that's just another rabbit hole. But also, when trusts, really go awry, maybe someone needs to be removed because it's a bad actor. Maybe it's just, there's a lot of family conflict. No one's agreeing, and so we wind up in court. Um, you know, so that door is also when a neutral party is typically appointed. And so there's just been a lot of learning over the years of seeing what works well and then also maybe what doesn't work well. And then I'm going in and needing to kind of clean up a mess. So that's where, again, there's just a lot of wisdom. And again, I think it's having the conversations proactively. A lot of times it's that, scenario that we've talked about that, the estate plan, the wishes were never talked about with the children. And so, when someone's grieving and going through loss, I think it also what can come up is just, you know, this level of not trusting and distrust, and sometimes rightfully so, but a lot of times it's feeling like, oh, you were mom and dad's favorite, or you're taking more. And again, having that conversations up front, doing more, updating your documents over the years. I also love they're called like a memorandum of intent, a letter of intent. This doesn't replace an estate plan. It's basically a letter that you can write that sits alongside, your estate plan and really communicating what your wishes and your intentions are. And it's really coming from you directly. So all of these kind of pieces, I think, is what goes with like this comprehensive planning that goes beyond just meeting with your attorney and signing documents.
I think the biggest problem is like, so my parents planned pretty well. We did have to hire an elder law attorney to read through the trust because when my dad passed away, everything went to my mom, who at that time had advanced Alzheimer's. And it was like, oh my God, if we have to go to court to get that straightened out, that's not going to be fun. Thankfully, like it was very clearly laid out, like on page one. My dad died first, if A, then B. And it was not clearly laid out for my mom, but it was there, like on page 11. He found it, was great, was well worth the money. Because that was just like a real stressful few days thinking that, oh my gosh, might actually have to go to court. The biggest problem was my dad just assumed my mom would come move in with me. Never had a conversation with me. This is like not news to any of the regular listeners. And that was super frustrating because my photography business was attached to my house. I had just turned 50. My daughter had finally moved out at 25. Um, like she didn't boomerang, so that was, it was worth the wait. But it was like, no, I'm looking forward to empty nest and I have my own life. And I
This is the
knew,
plan.
yeah, well, it's like I knew we wouldn't be good housemates with or without Alzheimer's. Her dog was a major issue. Uh,
Mhm.
I had 3 Goldens. They didn't like her. She was not psychologically grounded because my parents didn't really have the ability because of their failing health.
Mm.
Because all our other dogs were great, but she was a nightmare. So definitely didn't want those two in my house. And I knew my mom didn't want to move to memory care. She always said, I don't want to be a burden to you girls. I'm going to live in my home forever. Great. Those are mutually exclusive. Well, I had to make the decision that I felt was right for the entire family. My mom, her dog, me, my household, my sister and her household. And that was hard.
Yeah,
And
it's
there's
a lot of
times,
weight. Yeah.
it's like I knew, especially the first 6 weeks my mom was in memory care, is like, oh my God, are you ever going to acclimate? Or was this the biggest mistake of my life? And then one day she was like totally acclimated. I've talked about that day a lot. And she had friends. It was actually the best decision. So I'm like, oh, thank God. Like I didn't just like blow up everything, but you still kind of feel guilty.
Yeah.
And I figured my mom was 74. I figured she'd live like 10 years. I stressed about her money all the time. And then she lived for 3. And sometimes I'm like, well, if I knew it was going to be 3, like, no, no.
Either no way you know.
Well,
Yeah.
she probably wouldn't have passed away. She might, I don't know. We would have killed each other after a week. It's not apples and oranges. So I like you mentioned being a healthcare proxy. That would have been very beneficial because I hated having to make some of the hardcore decisions. What took my mom out was she fell and broke her leg and she was going to need surgery to repair it. This was, I'm not kidding, right at the very start of the pandemic. She fell March 8th, 2020. She's in the hospital and I'm like, is that the best place? I don't know what this COVID thing is. And she'd had Alzheimer's for 20 years. I'm like, I don't know if she gets anesthesia, what personality is going to wake up. That could be a nightmare. And then so I asked the surgeon how long I had to decide. And he's like, well, she's going to need physical therapy one way or the other. My mom flatly refused to cooperate. And I was like, that's it. We're not doing this. Too many negatives. You're not going to cooperate with the physical therapist. Then there's no point in putting you through a surgery. And I'm so glad that that was the choice that I made because she went back to the care home on March 12th and died March 31st, 2020.
Mm, mm.
So it was like, but that stress of, am I doing the right thing? And just, oh my God, I can still physically feel how hard that was. Whew, it was a time. Let me tell you, that was a great year.
Oh, right.
Well, the dog died in November, and then
Not
my
a very
maternal grandmother died literally like 54 weeks after my mom, or 53 and a half weeks. So like literally in, a year, it was like, COVID, my mom died, the dog died, our trip to Yosemite got canceled, my grandmother died. I was like, whoa, okay. I do not like this roller coaster.
Yeah. What's in the stars for you, right?
Yeah, for real. It's like, okay, I guess I should have started playing the lottery or something then.
Well, this is where it might be helpful to kind of touch upon just the profession as a whole. We're in California and we do in California, we do things a little differently. So we're one of two states that has this small license called a professional fiduciary license. There's only about 900 actively licensed fiduciaries in the state. But under that umbrella, we can wear these different hats. So we've touched upon that before, but let's just go through it. As I can act as a conservator, I can act as a trustee, as an executor, and I can also act as an agent, both for finance and healthcare. So that's generally kind of the work that we do. I find that some professional fiduciaries, really focus, maybe on more of the financial aspects of this work. Some focus their practice more on just the healthcare. I know some fiduciaries where all they do is only healthcare decision making, and then maybe they have a care or case management kind of service as well. And then there's fiduciaries kind of like myself, where what I love about the work is that I can kind of do a mix of things. It definitely keeps things always interesting, always on your toes, because each client, obviously has its unique needs, but even there with each client that I'm serving, sometimes I'm wearing multiple hats. Sometimes it's just one hat. So it really depends. So it's definitely a rewarding work where I'm always learning and growing and of course being of service and that's what, brought me to the work originally, thinking I'd be a hospice nurse. So
Well, sort of adjacent, I suppose.
yeah.
Definitely different training.
Yeah, different training. I would say the end of life care piece, is definitely a thread, through the work and ultimately carrying out people's final wishes, whether it's that healthcare decision making or just administering a trust, that's what I'm doing. So it's definitely a deep calling and very rewarding work. It's special. So yeah, so one of I think the wonderful things about the profession is that, for like just for example, like solo agers or maybe a couple where they their only child has a disability and wouldn't be able to support them as they age, partnering with a professional fiduciary that can not only manage your trust but also act as your agent during incapacity, so making that healthcare decision making and also managing finances, we can do all of that. And so that's where sometimes, that's the right fit for families and when the attorneys are making referrals. I'm based in the Bay Area. I'm finding also like going the route of a corporate trustee is becoming harder and harder for families because banks are really pushing up their minimum. So I've heard anywhere from like 3 to 5 million is a minimum, and most families don't have that. So who's going to serve them? So there's been this real like growing need on top of people just living so long. My model client, I had a client pass a few years ago at 110.
Oh, geez.
So yes, as for my clients that come to me in their 70s and 80s, naming me in documents, and they're like, we might have a few more years in us. I was like, no, you could definitely have a few more decades. So you never know.
110. So I'm 58 and a half almost.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's what that's 51 and a half. Geez, God.
Yeah.
I mean, I did plan real 103, but man, those extra 7 years is really getting me a little tired thinking.
Yeah. That's,
It's California. I might have to live that long just to pay off the bills. So we're talking to people caring for someone with dementia. What would you recommend, or why would you recommend that they consider using a service like yours? I can see it being beneficial for a lot of reasons, but one, it takes a lot of that caregiving responsibility away and allows you to be the child or the spouse or whatever relationship you have, and just, especially if you're caring for a spouse, it relieves some of that stress, and just it's like it just takes a chunk off your plate. That would be my pitch for it. But what would you
Yeah,
how would you
well, I
pitch it?
think there are a lot of benefits. I mean, most people, like we talked about, I feel like in the very beginning of our conversation, when you're going through this journey with whether it's your parent or, just a loved one in your life through dementia, it's like most people, it's the first time they're going through it. So you're not well resourced. You likely haven't really thought about any of these, the factors, whether it's, where they're going to live and age in place, all the care and complications that come with that. So I find that that's where partnering with a professional, whether it's a professional fiduciary or even just a care manager, can bring such like peace and relief to families because this is what we do professionally day in, day out. And so, we have a lot of solutions. On top of, we're also well resourced. Like we have professional fiduciaries. I think we're one of the most networked, professionals because we have to work with so many different moving pieces for each client. So, between, having amazing financial advisors and realtors and care managers and knowing, the like a placement agency and even, care homes and assisted living facilities, we're kind of dealing with all so many moving pieces for our clients and, many clients over, many years. And so that's where kind of building those relationships and trusts. Um, it's not just one off, right? Where you're kind of going boots on the ground and trying to figure out, okay, we're in a crisis. Who do we hire now? Or, where's mom going to move? Or can we even afford to keep mom at home? So doing that level of assessment is something that I think that most of us have to do quite regularly. The other piece is it allows, the family to just stay family. There really is, I hate to talk about the power differential, but there really is. When you're the trustee and you're holding the purse strings, and you're the one calling the shots and making the bills, paying the bills, if it's one sibling and not the other, that can kind of create a rift in the family and the relationship and people feeling like, oh, they're playing favorites. You already talked about kind of the downside of, if you're sharing that role, it can also add to conflict. So again, working with a neutral party, it can allow you to just go show up and visit mom and dad and just really enjoy that time together, during their final years. For me, I've been described as a really like collaborative, whether I'm a trustee or advanced healthcare decision maker. My approach is for the most part pretty collaborative. And I think I also have a background in case management. Maybe that's why that's not always helpful. So that's where there's certain cases, like very contentious cases, that's not always helpful. But for the most part, with where the team's working well, where there's not money being stolen or someone abusing mom and dad, but really just needing to find that extra level of support. I think a professional fiduciary can really be a good fit for families. Again, it's going to look differently. Like, if the person you're caring for has already lost capacity, that's then, they're no longer able to update their documents and name this person. There are some professionals though that work as consultants. At this point, I don't do that, but definitely know that some do, so it's worth looking out. So I'll share a few resources for your listeners. So PFAC, that stands for Professional Fiduciary Association of California. Um, our website, you can search for a professional fiduciary based on your county if you're in California, and also the service that you might be interested in. And then for listeners outside of the state of California, there's the National Guardianship Association, and you can search for professionals that do similar work in your local state. Again, I'll preface it of, most states don't have licensing, so, definitely be aware of that. I would say that might help you know where to start. And then also maybe, finding an attorney in your local state and asking for referrals could be another piece.
It makes sense. I know, like I said, it's been a little over 5 years since my mom's gone. And there are days when it's just like, if I have to make one more damn decision, like about food or groceries, I'm done. I don't want, and I feel like it's because I had to make all these decisions when my dad was on hospice, and then 3 years with my mom. And it's like not just running my own life, but I had to run theirs and then hers, and it just sometimes feels like, okay, could I have just not been the person to make all the final decisions? Like, control freakness is a problem on both sides of my family. So, I mean, I'm glad that I got to make all the choices because then I didn't have to deal with somebody else's choices. But, there's just times when it's like, I'll tell my husband, it gets really tiring having to decide what we're eating this week and ordering the groceries. And, and then you decide, I don't want that. And I think it's leftover from, I remember after my dad died at night on a Thursday, and I literally had about 48 hours where it was just like, my husband's like, he came in, I'd showered, and I was standing in the closet, like just gazing at clothing, like, I don't know. And he said, "What's the matter?" And I'm like, "Well, I don't want to put on any of my favorite stuff because I don't want to attribute negative memories to that, and I don't know what to wear." And I'm like, just pick something. And he looked at me like I was nuts because that's not something I'd ever do. And then later, maybe the next day, he's like, "Are you hungry?" I'm like, "Yeah, what do you want to eat?" "I don't care. Just figure out food." I'm not making decisions. That's all I got for about 48 hours. And then, I had to make all the decisions about mom and how to deal with my sister. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot. I mean, it's, there's a lot of weight, right? And then I think, that is maybe kind of, again, going back to that piece with, with working with a professional where you don't have the emotional weight of those relationships. And then, boy, does it hit you differently. My grandmother had Alzheimer's as well, so I personally know that journey. And from diagnosis to death, that was about an 8-year journey. And it, even doing this work professionally, it didn't make it any easier at all.
No. So that's why it's like I like to talk to people like you because, I've learned so much since my mom passed away. Hopefully, I don't have to use all this knowledge
Yeah.
personally again.
Yeah.
Thank you. But it's like, dang, if I knew then what I know now, I would definitely have hired a fiduciary to just manage some of the choices and decisions just so, you know, it doesn't feel so heavy. And I think, a lot of people are like, "Oh, I'm fine, I can manage." Trust me. I told you what happened in 2020, 3 deaths. I ended up with shingles in 21. And a friend of mine's like, "Well, you're under all this stress." And I'm thinking, how can I be under stress? My mom's gone. I don't have the elderly dog to deal with. Like, are you nuts? And I've recently learned again, like after the fact, that sometimes it takes a while for the stress to manifest in your body. And I'm like, oh, I guess she was right. That was my
Yeah.
body's way of saying, okay, we're releasing this stress in this really nasty form of shingles. So,
Oh,
yeah, not fun. I don't recommend it. So, and I've heard the shingles vaccine helps prevent dementia. So,
oh, really? I have not heard that.
yeah, and you're supposed to get it from if you're 50 or over. So, nobody told me that. So, yeah. So, just
Okay,
like,
good to know. I'll mark it on my calendar.
yeah, it's like, it's just amazing, and just, I think doing all you can to just go back to the relationship that you had prior to the disease. I think that's
Mhm.
huge. I think that's huge for them. It's huge for you. So I really appreciate you telling me how you can help people do that.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's definitely rewarding work. And I love talking to people like you that really get it. I always feel like, the children that have administered their parents' estates, and had to be the healthcare decision maker, they're the ones that get the work that I do the most because you did it. That's the work that you had to do for many, many years. And so, that in and of itself is, can be more than a full-time job. So there's a lot of weight, a lot of responsibilities. So yes, know that there are professionals like me out there.
Well, I appreciate you coming and explaining all this to me and the listeners. Again, hopefully I don't have to use it. But, the more knowledge you have, the more options you have, and that's what we all want is options and choices and doing the best we can for our loved ones.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you, Jen. This has been such a pleasure.